it is meant to be for drinking water. So naturally I have my bore well, which I switch on every morning and water the plants, and sometimes when the BWSSB doesn't see fit to give our area water, we use that water for drinking as well. Now tomorrow, even though I know this whole situation that we have talked about, the government is about to bring a regulation and say that, sorry Rohini, you cannot use any water from your bore well even to water your plants, because this is a common property resource and the state is going to hold that water as a trustee on behalf of the public. What am I going to say? What are my neighbors with bore wells going to say? What are farmers going to say? Farmers depend on bore wells because they don't have, those who don't have any canal irrigations at their doorstep. What are they all going to say? How are you going to convince them? What are the consensus regimes? What are the institutions that you are going to put into place to make sure there's not complete mayhem and lawlessness around groundwater? But whether we like it or not, sooner rather than later, we are going to have to grapple with this. And it's not like we are the only country in the world that has to grapple with this. Most countries have very strict enforcement regimes around groundwater. Certainly they don't allow everyone who wants it to dig a hole in the ground and draw water. Just like I cannot set up an iron ore mine tomorrow, unless I was very wealthy or had a lot of influence with a lot of people. I couldn't just set up an iron ore mine tomorrow morning. Similarly, I should not be able to set up something that draws out a public resource like water from the ground. We are going to have to grapple with this very quickly. But it's not all bad news. For centuries, farmers have been doing that anyway. For decades, there have been organizations helping farmers to manage their aquifers very well and very sustainably. They have been doing water budgeting. They've been understanding how much water is flowing through the aquifers. They've been doing calculations based on previous years of rain and saying, we have only this much water to work with this year. Therefore, what kind of crops will we put into the ground and how can we share the benefits of that water? So whether in Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka, whether in the Kutch region or whether in Gujarat or in other places, there have been many agencies, some of whom Argyam has been supporting, that have created groundwater management programs with community participation. And it seems to me that's how the model will have to be as we go forward. So anyone with questions on that can please discuss this when I'm done. I think three issues are there really when we talk about water security. Obviously quantity, we discussed a bit of that just now. Quality is beginning to be a tremendous problem in India. Why? Because we've polluted all our water bodies. We have been less than careful in how we manage, for example, waste, whether it's human waste, whether it's industrial waste. We're putting it back. It all finds its way back, unfortunately, into our water bodies. And even where you had good quality water, you are now finding issues of severe pollution, both bacterial pollution where human habitations are, but increasingly as we go deeper and deeper into the ground, we have geogenic pollution sources such as contamination of water with fluoride and arsenic. Arsenic on the eastern side, but now we are finding arsenic in different parts of the country. And in the Deccan Plateau, you see a lot of fluoride. Now, fluoride is very nice if it's in toothpaste, a little bit of it. But if it's in your drinking water, then you are bound to get all kinds of very debilitating, degenerative joint diseases. And I've seen people who've been drinking contaminated fluoride water and they have an extremely painful existence. Some millions and millions of people in this country are affected with fluoride and arsenic contaminated water. And it would seem like there were very simple solutions, but somehow they are not come together as well as they should. So issues of quality we discussed, issues of quantity, iron, fluoride, arsenic, and bacterial contamination. These are all ever-present dangers for us, and we again have to find the right mechanisms to prevent further deterioration in our quality. And the last thing, of course, which is always there in every service in India, is issues of equity. Even when you say a habitation is covered, when you say, yes, so much LPCD for X amount of people has been provided into a hamlet, if you really go deeper into the story, you will find that the Dalit part of the village may actually not be getting that same quality and that same reliability. So as you begin to unpack all these things, you see that issues of equity are very strong. You will see that women who often, as you know, bear the most burden for the supply of water, for the management of water in their own homes, and mercifully the distance that women have to walk in the country has been coming down year on year, except in situations of drought, when back it is, they have to go further and further out because all the nearby sources are dried out. And who is it that is going to trudge all those kilometers? It's going to be the younger women. But so you will see issues of unequal access even within a home or within a village which has enough supply. So issues of quality are exacerbated by issues of sanitation, because we haven't talked about sanitation. It's a subject much after my own heart. All of you know that I think it was very catchy. It caught the nation's imagination to think that we have more cell phones than we have toilets. And actually, I don't think it's a very relevant thing, but doesn't matter. The fact is that the latest census tells us that half the population, half the households in this country don't have access to a toilet. How would it be? Imagine, close your eyes for a minute and imagine the place you left this morning. If there was no loo, and if you had to come to the Terry campus and find a green spot somewhere where nobody else looked at you. Well, half the population of this country has to do exactly that. I've met women who plan their meals in such a way that they don't have to go until the night because there's no safe place for them to go. And the downstream impacts of having public defecation are almost too horrible to think through. Eventually, where is all that human waste going? It's coming right back into your water in some way or the other. So, you know, we have to be careful what we are drinking. In Delhi, you really have to be careful what you're drinking. Your city doesn't really treat its sewage very much. You know that. The CIC brought out something called Excreta Matters. I suggest, not very close to your meal times, I suggest you keep that volume in your library and look at it. Some very shocking statistics. In the entire country, 80% of our sewage goes untreated. 50% of our people are looking for places to defecate in the open in every single day. Imagine the tons and tons and tons and tons of human waste, which of course which should go into your food session next, because that's where it belongs. All that human waste has to turn into fertilizer, come back into the soil, and come back into our bodies as nutrients, instead of being lost by being contaminated with water, by rather contaminating our water. And this is a huge issue for us in the country. The good thing is, the demand for toilets is going up, government's allocations for toilets are going up, and especially young women have taken it in their own hands to say that they will not be married into households without toilets, and many self-help groups have come together to create a special loan products for people to build toilets in their homes, so that the deficit from the government gives, and depending on the program, anywhere between 2 and 10,000 rupees for people to build their own toilets. Because it is in the public interest. It is, all of us should be happy if everyone else is building toilets, because this is something that has an impact on us all. Unless all of us are not in the, they call it the practice of open defecation, I don't know. But unless everyone has a safe way to put their human waste, none of us are safe wherever we are. So it is in the public interest that 100% of our people go and do their job in dignity and privacy and in safety. Because all our public health problems emerge from, so many of our public health issues just come from this one simple thing, that we don't have proper sanitation. For proper sanitation, you also need proper water, because you can't just have a hole in the ground, a dry latrine. That has not been very successful. So very briefly talk to you about something some of you might have heard about, which Argyam has also been supporting. Institution called Gram Vikas in Orissa, led by Joe Madiyat, over the last several years has been creating this fabulous system by which a village sits down and agrees that all of us will get involved in this project, no citizen left behind, and then he creates a system where people build toilets and bathrooms with 3 taps. Rich and poor get the same system. They dig, if necessary, they understand what water resources they need to improve, and they make sure that in the village, every single household gets a proper, safe toilet and safe water. That kind of work is now expanding. So hopefully the story on sanitation will look very different in the next 10 years. I will touch on only one more subject and then I'll open this up for a discussion. I wanted to talk about the difference between rural and urban water supply systems and governance. Who governs our water? Is water a concurrent subject or a state subject? It's a state subject. So really it is up to the state governments to decide how to allocate their water resources. Another big lacuna in public policy is that we don't yet have, we have administrative institutions along administrative lines, but not on natural boundaries of water. Because obviously water doesn't know the difference between Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. But unlike other countries, we have not yet developed proper governance institutions along natural resource boundaries like river basins, for example. It's about to come, I think. It's contested territory, but unlike other countries around the world, we don't have river basin management authorities. So it is the states that manage the water, and interstate issues are taken up at a higher level. So within our latest governance systems after the 73rd and 74th Amendment, all around the country, it is your panchayat or your municipality, your urban local body or your panchayat that is responsible for creating the water supply systems and managing the water resources so that every household and every individual gets water. But of course, while Gram Panchayats and rural governance systems have had decades and decades of practice and have been improving year on year, our urban water governance is a bit of a mess. We still haven't got it right. And especially in the towns of India, smaller towns of India, the bigger cities have their parastatal bodies or their municipalities that are in Bombay, it is the municipality that runs the water system. In Bangalore, it is a parastatal body called the BWSSB. Delhi had the Jal Board and other institutions depending on NDMC, or that's also a little complicated. But in the smaller towns, neither is there the capacity nor is there the proper funding to run modern water supply systems. And you will find, if you travel around smaller towns of India, that much more needs to be done, and how urban water is managed in this country is going to have to very quickly, kicking and screaming, come into a modern management paradigm. Because otherwise, the conflicts that are going to arise between the urban citizen and the rural citizen over water might make Arab Spring look like a comic strip. We are going to have to really very quickly start thinking about the urban citizen and what responsibility we have about water and our waste. And we will all have to get involved willy-nilly in really improving the way urban water is managed in this country. It's again a topic that I would like to talk a little more about, but more in conversation form. Sorry, there was a hand up there. You wanted, yes, go ahead.
2 years back, I had made the toilet into my house. It is in Azamgarh district, but 20 kilometers away from the district headquarters. The point which I want to say, my women members of my family, they won't go there. They are more comfortable in going in open than into the toilet. So this is very, very big issue. I think this should be taken into consideration. And this is more important, the issue of mindset of the public. I think whatever we are discussing in all the lectures, this is more important topic.
Yes, I agree. But a lot of thinking has been going into this also. If you were a rural woman, used to going out into the open with the birds chirping and nice open, lots of air around you, and then the government came and built a 3 by 3, slightly bigger than this podium, toilet for you and said, which one would you rather do? So we really need to rethink the toilet itself. The toilet itself has to be, I mean, in urban areas we have flushes, you can flush and forget about where the waste goes. If toilets are not much more convenient and much more, the design element of it does not improve very much, I think we can't blame people. Because one of the big reasons when we did a large household survey, and finally when you ask people, but why don't you use the toilet? They say it's too smelly, and you can't blame them. So unless you have the proper back end, no pun intended, unless the systems, what happens behind the toilet, where is that waste going, how cleanly and safely is it going, and what is the experience of being in that toilet, unless that improves dramatically, you're not going to be able to force 1.2 billion people into 3x3 holes. You just won't. So there is a lot going on about how can we make that a much more better convenience and a much more dignified experience. So I think that's one of the answers.
The question is the type of toilets which we are using in the cities. If you want to say we have to have 10 times more comfortable, more good toilets in the villages, I think this is not possible. So even with this type of this thing, so issue of mindset is more important over there. I'm not talking about the. I'm talking about the toilets which we are into the city flush of this thing, very comfortable. Still, it is very difficult to convince. It is not the chirping of the birds. जिस सुनने के लिए लोग जाते हैं. This is very important question.
No, it's very true.
Without addressing.
No, actually, I didn't mean to be flippant at all. It is a very serious subject. The fact is that if you provide latrines, you must be able to provide some water. The woman must have water along with the toilet, even if it is a pour flush, twin pit latrine. Even so, there must be a reliability of water, because that latrine falls into disuse very quickly without the correct amounts of water in that toilet. We have seen it time and time again. So often it is about ensuring the water source sustainability first, and then the sustainability of that toilet. And all over the world, some of the development challenges have been to reinvent the toilet, to look at, in fact, beautiful designs of waterless toilets. Because where there is less water, you're never going to be able to, it's completely unsustainable, the kind of water usage we have when we flush down, whether it's 12 liters, even the most water-saving flushes take 7 to 8 liters of water. And obviously, the world cannot afford that kind of water closet anymore. So as we speak, there are scientists around the world, designers around the world, looking at how can we have ecologically sustainable, waterless and cost-effective toilets. And that is, I think, some of the most exciting development innovation that needs to be done.
Spoke about interstate conflict over water, like whether it is Periyar between Tamil Nadu and Kerala, or Kaveri between Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. Just like also we have international issues regarding water between like the Indus River basin, like the construction of dams between that, and India has been having conflicts with Pakistan and over Brahmaputra with China. So I read a very interesting article and it said future wars will be fought over water. So I just want you to put some light over this, like or this area.
Right. Actually, it was Ismail Seraluddin who said that. The fact is, I also read some intelligence reports recently. You're not going to see water wars in a hurry. I mean, you're not going to see international water wars. That's not going to make much sense. What you might see is some nations flexing their muscle over if they are at the upper head of a river body, they might try to dam it. But more often than not, actually, in international diplomacy, you have found when in countries have to share river waters, for example, they have successfully managed to create treaties. So I don't believe in this doomsday prediction of wars over water. It's not going to be so easy to fight wars over water. Water and land are linked. You can't really, you can't go and take over another country's river, for example. So, but you could certainly cause a lot of trouble downstream by damming some of the water upstream, and you will see some of those tensions rise. But at least recent history has shown us that countries have managed to create treaties of reasonably fair sort of things for negotiating the sharing of water. So I am not so worried about that.
It doesn't really happen between India and Pakistan.
It has actually. I don't want to go into details of it because I don't have complete knowledge. But if you look at the barrages, and in fact, the treaties have been, in spite of all the other conflicts we've had with Pakistan, we've done a reasonably good job at water sharing, whether it's with Bangladesh or with Pakistan or even with China. I don't know what's going to happen in the future with China, but I don't think there's going to be a third world war on water. And I hope I'm right.
Yeah, ma'am, I'm Colonel Verma from the Indian Army. And I would like to mention this fact, and it is a fact that future wars will be fought on water.
Okay.
And
I don't even want
Yeah.
to bet on with you on this. Yeah.
I'll give you an example of Israel, Syria, and Palestine.
Right.
Actually, they are fighting on water.
That's true.
They have the common aquifer. People out here must be knowing about that. And that is what they control. Though they have a treaty on that also, and equitable sharing is there. In India, you would have heard about the Indus Water Treaty
Yes.
with Pakistan.
Yes.
Recently, a barrage was being constructed in J&K, to which Pakistan objected. And that objection has now been settled because, again, equitable sharing has been arrived at. So these are the points of conflict, and they lead to wars. So it's a fact that future wars will be fought on water if we don't manage it properly.
Right.
About China, you would have heard there was some kind of a stagnation, and people in India were worried, okay, what is going to happen to that lake? And good for us that nature took care of it, and slowly it subsided. Again, China is trying to build some dams on this Brahmaputra river, which is the origin, it has its origin in China. And these are the matters which are being tackled at diplomatic and international levels to avoid all these conflicts. But this saying that future wars will be fought on water, it's a true saying if we don't manage it well.
Right. So that's a good lesson for us that the issues of water management are going to be ever present. And whether it's because China diverts the Brahmaputra or whether through climate change, all our predictions of what resources are going to be available to us at any predictable time. Either way, we can't escape the extreme urgency of managing what water we have as well and as equitably as we can. Which is why I've been saying that we really need to think of ourselves in the future as a low water society, as a low water economy, and build the idea of use as little water as possible. Not less water than you need, but as little water as efficiently as possible, because we don't know, precisely for the reasons that he is talking about, and because scientists are telling us extreme events will happen with climate change, we don't know what the future holds in store. And so we have to constantly think, what are the appropriate institutions, what are the appropriate technologies, what are the appropriate leadership, what is the kind of leadership we need so that we can move towards being a low water society and a low water economy. There was another hand over here. Yes, go ahead.
Ma'am, I'll be coming back to sanitation, to what dear sir over there added. I would like to say it's not just the women who go out in the open and for the waste generation. It's I was recently, not very recently, 2